Back out by Jamey Baker. Yushkevich wheels it back in. Lindros lost. Archibald takes him out of the play. Up with it is Recchi. Walks in front. Shot one, knocked down. Rebound, score! Lindros!
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah with the O&B Puckcast, brought to you by PhillySportsNetwork.com, and we just want to wish you a happy new year. And for the Flyers, it's a new year, but I'm afraid there's not a lot of cheer. But we have a couple guests tonight, and before we get to that, just want to introduce my partner tonight from BrotherlyPuck.com, Dan the Flyer fan. How are you, man?
Doing pretty good, Isaiah.
Yeah, looks like Chef is taking a powder. Is that another drinking binge, or is he stuck working at the Steam Pub on 2nd Street Pike in Southampton, Pennsylvania? Easy access from I-95 and I-Turnpike. But that could be it. But we do have two special guests here to talk about what's going on with the Flyers. We're going to start with from sonsofpen.com, returning guest, Tom Foti. How are you, man?
I finally got there. It took me until January, but I finally accepted it. The Flyers are bad. It's time to burn it down.
Burning down the house.
With the exception of a few guys, we need a retool, and we need it bad.
It is. We got rid of the tools, the general manager and coach. Now we got to go a little further. But without any further ado, we'll also introduce from PhillySportsNetwork.com our first guest ever and many times on the show. Welcome back, Jamey Baskow.
Hey, how you all doing? I appreciate you for having me on again, and hello to all your followers. And I'm happy to be here. And to touch on what you said about Chef, I went to Steam on Saturday, and phenomenal place. Chef is an awesome chef. He really does. He's amazing. I mean, he makes the best French dips, burgers. I mean, it don't matter. I mean, that place is fresh. You know, you want fresh food, good food. Steam is it. It's a very good atmosphere. Even at 1:30 in the afternoon, just sitting here watching the Michigan game, it was packed.
Yeah, in fact, I'm calling the owner now. I want some remuneration here for this. But, gentlemen, since our last show, the Flyers have gone 3-4-1. The reason why Tom mentioned it, I had to admit, and put a tweet out last night about the stages of what was that, Tom? I'll let you say it.
The 5 stages of the 2018-19 Flyers season.
Yes.
Denial. There's no way we're this bad. Anger. How are we this bad? Bargaining. Look, things will change now that Hack's gone. Depression. This team just sucks the energy out of me. Acceptance, we're terrible.
Perfect. Or as someone said, brilliant. Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes. The Flyers have 35 points or last in the Metro. They'd have to play close to 700 hockey to reach the usual 96-point playoff benchmark. A lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is where do they go from here? We're going to go through some of the wreckage of what this season has been. But, gents, we got to start with some good news because back on the 18th of December, in another time warp, it seems like, the Flyers beat the Detroit Red Wings 3-2. Carter Hart's NHL debut and Scott Gordon's first game as the coach. It really was somewhat of a festive occasion, if you can consider that it's just a mid-season regular season game. And Dan, what do you remember from that night, and what impressions did you take home?
Well, I think it was the game against Detroit as well as the game against Nashville. The teams were better, whether it was there to play for Scott Gordon, but really I think they were out there to play for Carter Hart, to really work their asses off to keep him as protected as they could. And then once Hart's shine kind of wore off over the next couple of games, they kind of let him down a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. The players definitely seem to be on their best behavior, and their care quotient was higher than it's been in weeks. Jamey, what were you thinking at the end of that game, that first game versus Detroit?
I saw a team that was playing their butts off, for a young man between the pipes there and Carter Hart. It seemed that Carter Hart gave the team energy, which has been, lacking pretty much the entire season. And that's where, I think they're lacking identity because of such. But it just seemed that, they were playing their butts off for Scott Gordon, Carter Hart. And it just looks a team that we haven't seen all year. They look cohesive as a unit. They worked well. The communication was there between each other. And then, like Dan said, after the Nashville game, they had one bad game and kaput. I mean, it is what it is. And this team, they have gone through players that are having down years. And when that game, after beating the Detroit Red Wings, I was like, maybe some of these players will right the ship. Some of them have, like Gottisbehere, I think, has become better these past few games, but he's still not all there yet. Ivan Provorov has looked better, but he's not all there yet. And this is the team that you get.
Yeah. Let me break in there, and something comes to mind, and when you think about it, Tom, you see that picture of when the Flyers were defending the goal against the Preds in the closing moments, and that was peak Flyers effort, and it just something came into my mind. Back on the 26th of November, the Flyers fired Ron Hextall, and if they had done this right, they should have fired Hextall at the same time. And because they had gaps in time where Gordon could have installed his systems, like if they were so crazed about trying to, quote, save this season, they actually were so seduced by getting Joel Quenneville that they probably cost themselves any chance when you look back then as compared to where they're at now.
I think there's definitely a degree of truth in there that maybe that gap did cost him the season, but even I really do believe this. Even if Joel Quenneville was behind the bench right now, I still think that this team would not be showing the life that they need to be showing right now, because it takes time for a system and for a culture to get in place. And the reason I kind of say that, I think the Flyers would kind of be where they are right now. Maybe they come out of this road trip 4-4 instead of 3-4-1, or maybe they come out 4-3, 4-3-1, or something along those lines. To me, the problem is not who's behind the bench. I think you could put Scotty Bowman behind the bench of this team, and they're still going to give you the same effort. They might be a little bit more pissed off because Bowman, I don't think he tolerated any of the stuff that the Flyers have been doing lately. Right. But to me, this is a player issue. And I was taking a look back at the schedule of December. In the very beginning, it was kind of like the beginning of the end for Dave Hextall. We all knew that if he didn't show up on this road trip, if he didn't make this team show up on the road trip, they were done.
Yep.
At the end of December, they go through another long road trip with them getting away from the Wells Fargo Center for a little bit, and it was the exact same thing, just a different face behind the bench. And you always expect a team to have a little bit of jump after a coaching change or after a major shakeup, because then guys are rattled a little bit. It's after the dust settles where you actually see what a team is made of and what is actually in that locker room and part of the team's identity. And right now the Flyers are what they have been since really the lockout year. They're a consistently inconsistent team, and they need a major shakeup, and they need it bad. Now, when that major shakeup comes, we don't know, but it's time for them to break up this core.
Absolutely. There's no question right now that Ron Hextall must have really been fooling himself to think when you come out of last year, Dan, when you think about it, you could clearly see they needed some insurance in goal, didn't get it. They needed to address one of their top three needs in goal and also either a top four defenseman or a third line center. Didn't get that done. And really, when you think about it, JVR is just a replacement level player for Wayne Simmons, who we all know that Ron Hextall wasn't going to resign.
Yeah, Ron Hextall, had the team as it was, and he had an idea of what it could be, but he had no intentions of getting from point A to point B, and he just kind of, went with it. They needed things this summer, and he didn't get it. Everybody, he signed JVR, and he kind of put everybody at ease, in the Flyer Twitterverse, because they all believed that he was going to come in and, continue his 30-goal campaign that he's had for the past couple of seasons in Toronto, but at the end of the day, it didn't happen. And, the issues are clearly starting to arise now when the whole team, Jamey was talking about it, the whole team is pretty much having a down year. A lot of these key players aren't producing. And now there really is a big question mark. Chuck Fletcher has a lot on his plate to figure out over the next couple months and into the summer to try and really right this ship.
Yes, unfortunately, that is the case. From the point of the Predators game where the Flyers eke out a 2-1 victory, albeit with a somewhat of depleted Predator squad compared to the one that they played last night. They lose to Columbus 4-3. They defeat the Rangers on the road in a shootout. Then they were down, 5-2 in Tampa, and they came back, tied it up, including a dazzling move like Claude Giroux, which apparently inspired somebody to write an article. Claude Giroux is God, but they lost that game in overtime. They lose to the Panthers 2-1, and that's a game they started out okay, and then they gave the Florida skilled players too much space, and they had too many. Jamey, they lose to Carolina, which I think was the most disheartening of the losses because Carter Hart had his first bad game where he gave us up three goals on 10 shots. 2 of them he really should have had. And the Flyers were outshot 25-12 in the final 40 minutes. And they were charged with 46 turnovers. And even if that's exaggerated, it speaks to what kind of awful game that the Flyers played that night.
Oh, absolutely. It took everything that built up, that all the goodness that surrounded this team with Carter Hart and the fans, feeling, some sort of optimism because Carter Hart, was in between the pipes, and to have that type of performance. Was it Carter Hart's best performance? No, but I will tell you this. The Flyers are really loosey-goosey in that neutral zone, and I don't care who they were facing. They would have lost that game. It's terrible the way the Flyers are just so lackadaisical with effort, and that includes, Wayne Simmons, who's just, I don't know, he's not hurt by any means. He's just being lazy right now, or he's just really exhausted. And, I mean, you're just getting terrible back-checking from your forwards, aren't doing a good job at all with back-checking. It's like they're out to lunch half the time. And now I feel bad for Scott Gordon because I saw a few tweets, people saying, Scott Gordon this, Scott Gordon that. Honestly, he's only had 1 or 2 practices to implement his system, even though he's been here, 2.5 weeks now or something. He's only had, 2 practices, full practices, to where he's had time to implement a system. That's not including morning skates, because morning skate is just to keep your legs fresh, so to speak. You're not really working on drills per se, or, penalty kill and power play. And I will tell you about this. I have a huge problem with our power play. I'm sorry. Chris Knobloch, to me, has to be on the chopping block there. There's no way that this much talent should be 31st, the worst team, but the PP over the PK, in my eyes, it's unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable to be 31st in the league with this much power play. JVR had 11 power play goals for the Toronto Maple Leafs last year. What is going on here?
Yeah, so I think you're renaming Chuck Knobloch, Chuck Chopping Block.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I know everybody's really glad I got that in. I think that with that power play, they tried some different looks last night in Nashville, but the personnel usage to me, even with Knobloch's shortcomings, and to be frank, I think Gordon is the one who's trying to tweak things, and Knobloch may be being pushed to the side. Why is JVR not in the position that Couturier is in? Couturier is not a shooter per se.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I don't get it. And then on the second power play, I mean, can we just like cash the chips in with Ivan Provorov?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was just a show. He should have been off, months ago. For Travis Sanheim, for that matter. Sanheim should have been on that unit pretty much the whole year. And I'm happy he's starting to get PP2 time now. But you know what? With the way Ghost has been playing, I mean, I know he's been better these past 2 games. I would have even bumped Sanheim up to PP1. I mean, you got to get something back there. I mean, if something isn't clicking, the PP1 unit's better than the PP2 unit. But, I mean, it's unacceptable. The PK, again, is 28th in the league. Is 75. I think it's 75.4%. Our special teams. You're not going to succeed in today's day NHL with these bad special teams. You can have mediocre special teams be in the middle of the pack and make the playoffs, but you can't be 31 and 28. It's just not. You're not good enough. We have to come to the acceptance that this team is just not very good, and your special teams aren't very good. So, sorry, but your 5-on-5 play, you're going to get the same play.
It's interesting. Let me cut in there and for a second. It's interesting. Their special teams are so bad that their shooting percentage on their power play is less than that 5-on-5. And Tom, even though the penalty kill in the last 18 games is approaching 86%, it's a little bit under overall, I think it's 28th in the league, like Jamey mentioned. I think the power play is something like 12% last in the league. What can you say?
It's not our year. I mean, that's really all you can chalk it up to is that we need a clean sweep. Whenever this season ends, there needs to be a clean sweep of the coaching. Maybe sans Scott Gordon because he's got a track record of a good penalty kill.
Right.
In the National League and also in the American League. But in all likelihood, that's probably not going to happen. A coach is going to want to bring in his own assistants. It would be nice for Gordon to stick around because I think he's a good I think he might be looking at another NHL coaching job. So this could be a little tryout for him, and then he kind of takes the Todd Nelson route that he's been going for the last couple of years. Or I think he's in his second year with the Dallas Stars, and he and Jim Montgomery had, from what I read, a handshake agreement that Nelson will be there for a couple of years or until another team calls up and says, "Hey, we want to coach you," and Nelson's free to go.
Right. And I think that would be a good situation. That, I mean, right now, Gordon, I think he came in like the day before or the day of the Detroit game. Was that it? I think the day before, the 17th.
I believe so.
Right, he hasn't been able to really install a lot, like Jamey mentioned. So it's a tough situation. He's been being a good soldier here. Of course, these are very difficult jobs to get, but it would be interesting. I think the Flyers are going to lean toward wanting to get somebody like Quenneville or Todd McClellan here. Those are good coaches, so I certainly don't blame them. But before they do any of that, Dan, and this kind of harkens back to things that Tom and Jamey and myself are saying. They need to really think about, just kind of like Vegas did. Who do we want to be? How do we want to play? And let's get the personnel in here that match that. Let's get the scouting people, the analytics people. The Flyers, unlike other teams, have a surfeit of assets. That's one thing Hextall did very well. This could be actually a golden opportunity for a general manager without any preconceived notions to just remake this thing and go from there. This might not be a completely downer type of situation.
I mean, the Flyers certainly have enough prospects and draft picks and current roster players to really go out and redo everything if they really want. I agree that they need to. I think I would just get rid of all the coaches. I would love to keep Scott Gordon in some facet because I think he does bring a lot to this team. He's familiar with most of the players because of their time in Lehigh Valley. But, if they can bring in somebody like Coach Q, that would be great. They're going to need some new assistants because I don't think Lappy or what were we calling it before? Chopping Block was going to, they're going to make it.
Chopping Block, yeah.
But yeah, there needs to be some moves made. I said it earlier. Chuck Fletcher has a huge task in front of him to really try and bring this team around. There's a lot of veteran players here that aren't producing, and there's a lot of young guys that aren't producing, and you just gotta make the moves to bring in some extra people to really jumpstart this team.
Yeah. And last night it was kind of a shame for as bad and lethargic as the Flyers were in Carolina. They actually gave a good effort. If you look at the heat map, as it's called, where the Flyers' chances compared to Nashville, statistically, the Flyers held their own. But losers lose. And that loss marked the 13th time this season that the Flyers have been either shut out or held to a single goal, including the game in Carolina. So it's this time, like we said earlier, that this core needed to be broken up, I think, a couple of years ago, more aggressively by Ron Hextall. We're not going to slag on him anymore. So, Jamey, there are a couple articles out there. I want to go to your piece in a little bit. You talked about defensemen who they could trade for, but before that, there's a overarching piece that looks at the big picture. There's three of them, actually. John Sequela had one at Broad Street Hockey. Check that out. Charlie O'Connor at The Athletic. And particularly one that I've referenced already tonight was Anthony Sanfilippo's at Crossing Broad, where he talked about the scope of what the Flyers really need to do after this road trip.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with his piece. They need a clean slate here. And, one thing I will say, I'm not too keen on adding a goaltender right now. I think that could be held off until the offseason because there's no point, in my personal opinion, with nobody really out there right now that's, pretty much available. With Jonathan Bernier, for instance, with the uncertainty for Jimmy Howard, I think Bernier is a shoo-in to be re-signed. But there's just no one really, of interest
you mean Howard,
there.
Right?
I'm sorry?
You mean Howard, because Bernier's locked up for 2 more years after this year.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think Jimmy Howard's gone. He becomes a UFA, at year's end. But I mean, he doesn't really suit the Flyers. He's 35 years old at this particular time, and there are some good goalies, decent goalies that are available. Semyon Varlamov, Cam Talbot, Keith Kincaid, Casey DeSmith from Pittsburgh, Robin Leonard, and Curtis McEnany. And I wouldn't be, I'd be, that's in the off season for that matter. I would like Robin Leonard. I think he'd be a decent asset, depending on what route the Flyers, are going to go. And that's what I mean. There's more opportunities in the off season as opposed to now, to where, pretty much with the exception for the Flyers, everybody, they're in the midst of a playoff berth here. So, the Flyers are a desperate team, so we're going to have to give up that much more to obtain, what we would have liked for goaltender stand-wise. But I think there's a little more availability for, a top 4 defenseman. They have a little more leeway, or to add a prominent, a forward.
Yeah.
And,
well, Jamey, I want to stick with goaltenders right now because I do have some information. According to The Athletic, the Red Wings have not made a decision yet with Jimmy Howard. they're in a position where they can envision themselves going either way with Howard, because they have Bernier in tow, and they know Howard. And if he's just going to sign for a couple years, then they're set. They don't have to worry about it. It gives them more time to find alternatives. I'm not sure about who their young up-and-coming goaltender is. But I think if you infer from what we saw on the broadcast last night from Chuck Fletcher, let's talk about Carter Hart. I don't think there's any question that they want Carter Hart to be playing regularly, and they don't want him to be in a situation where he's getting pulled. It's okay once or twice, but it gets to 3 and 4 times. These are the issues I think that are foremost on his mind. They don't want to blow this development period. And I'm going to move to Tom, if it's okay, and get your comments on that, as well as some of the other names that might motivate the Flyers to say, you know what, I want to get somebody in here now so I know what this picture looks like.
Yeah, it was on the broadcast last night that Fletcher was kind of alluding to that Carter Hart will not be here if he's sitting on the bench primarily as a backup. That's not the way he's going to become the goaltender that he's capable of becoming. And personally, I'd rather him be playing in Lehigh Valley and helping the Phantoms in the playoff run than sitting up here and getting torched by his own defense. I mean, all the other goaltenders that are kind of at least worth naming have all been named, from Varlamov, depending on how okay the Flyers are with his off the ice issues. I know there's a few to be named. Jimmy Howard is definitely one. I would look. I know Robin Leonard is another one. He's only signed for a year. Right. He's an unrestricted free agent, and he's posting pretty good stats with the Islanders. But Barry Trotz is a more defensive oriented coach. Still, though, Leonard's only 27. Cam Talbot might be a reclamation project. I mean, he's in the tire fire with a continuous can of gasoline being poured into it. That is the Edmonton Oilers.
Right.
Talbot might be worth looking into. I know Anthony Sanfilippo put in Jonathan Quick as a potential trade target. I mean, that's Quick is another conversation for another time. But getting back to Carter Hart, it's clear that they don't want him sitting on the bench / going in and being thrown to the wolves with a pack of meat thrown on his back. They want him playing as much as he can and building confidence and working out those kinks in his game. He's shown the flashes that he can be a legit goaltender, but he's still got to work through him, and he's not going to do that when he's sitting on the bench.
No, I agree, and I think it's pretty clear if the Flyers have a bias in one direction or another, if I could use that word that became almost infamous from the mouth of Dave Scott, it is that Carter Hart be back in Lehigh Valley for the reasons that you cited. And Dan, Jonathan Quick, you wrote an article about at brotherlypuck.com, and it concerns me, and I'll tell you why. Because when Nick Kyprios and many others are talking about the Flyers and Jonathan Quick, and he's more open than he might have been in the past to coming here. He's more open to maybe being the guy for a couple of years and maybe having a managed decline. It concerns me because I'm worried about the cost of getting a player like that.
Yeah, I kind of pointed it out in the article. A couple weeks ago, I wrote one about why Bobrovsky would not be the best idea. Now I kind of looked at Hart because he's the other bigger name that everybody keeps talking about. And Jonathan Quick is going to be one of those guys that if you're going to pursue, the cost is interesting. The Kings are actually, they're tied with points with 35 with Philadelphia right now. So they're last in their respective division. It's not like they're really going anywhere anytime soon. Their empire is starting to collapse finally after all these years. And, they could ask for a lot for a starting goaltender of Quick. He has faced his health issues over the past 2-3 years. But overall, when he's healthy, he's still a top guy. And I think the price could be high. But again, we talked about it a little bit earlier. The Flyers do have a lot of pieces to work with. You don't usually see top prospects traded anyway, so I think you could probably keep Frost and Farabee and Ratcliffe and, guys like that. But, he would be a guy I would be hesitant to get. But, if they could get him relatively cheap, I would be okay with it for a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. For me, having some kind of certainty in goal and having enough behind Quick where if there were injuries, which definitely concern me, at least there'd be something to backing him up. And he has returned. He missed parts of 4 seasons in his career. Again, if maybe one of the prospects like that's at a mid-6 level, a second-round pick, and something maybe conditional down the road, depending on how many games he plays and something like that, maybe I could live with it. It really concerns me. I understand that the Flyers want to kind of just settle this thing a little bit and do a little damage control because their save percentage, I think, is the worst in the league. And their penalty kill save percentage, I think, is the worst in the league. So I get it. 2 other names you might hear about and would connect it with the Flyers by the by are Anderson with Ottawa and Craig Anderson. And I think it's possible with today's trade, outside chance that Jacob Markstrom could be a guy that might be available. They made a trade for a goaltender, McKenna, for who is it? Is it Bachman to Ottawa, and I forget.
Anders Nilsson.
Nilsson, that's it. Right, reminds me of Bachman, they're both backboards, big guys, can't control the rebounds, and it's possible that Thatcher Demko, who has about 90 games in the AHL, might be ready to be promoted. And maybe that opens up an opportunity for the Flyers. We'll have to take a look at that based on that trade with Nielsen and McKenna and some other pieces. And Jamey, I wanted to get back to you because you did a fine article at PhillySportsNetwork.com about D-men the Flyers could trade for. A couple of them were UFAs, but a couple of the others, like Alex Martinez and Colton Parayko, are not. And I think that's more likely where the Flyers would head.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely – I love Alec Martinez. I love everything about his game. He's averaging 21 of ice time on the year, plays in all facets of the game that his coach asks for. And that, to me, isn't – a lefty is cheaper than a righty. So I intermixed with lefties and righties there because righties are going to cost more for obvious reasons. Alec Martinez is one lefty that has a rocket of a shot who hits the net with accuracy. But he would fit the mold of the orange and black, and he'd be able to play with an Ivan Provorov and take some of that, pressure off of Provy. I mean, let's not forget Provorov is only in his 3rd year, and that's why, to me, a top 4 defenseman is of much more imperative at this particular time than an actual goaltender. I think the writing's on the wall for Carter Hart to be sent down. So, to me, add a top 4 defenseman. I'd like Jake Gardiner, from the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Maple Leafs are going to have a hard time this offseason. They have 2 restricted free agents, 2 prominent, restricted free agents, 2 signed over there, and Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews, and they're just going to have to shell out a lot of money. I mean, that team's already up against the cap anyway. So I don't know if they're going to be able to re-sign a player like Jake Gardiner. Now, of course, they're in a cup run, but would you like to see Jake Gardiner, walk for nothing? Toronto is lacking at the defensive level right now. That's sort of not lacking, but that's their weakness. I'd like Colton Parayko. I've always liked this kid. Again, he plays in every facet of the game, and St. Louis is a dumpster fire, so why not inquire? I didn't put I didn't put Muzzin on there, and Muzzin, I think, would stay over Alec Martinez. I don't think they'll get rid of both, so I chose Martinez over Muzzin, to tell you the truth.
Right,
and
that's
why I left him off. I can't see LA just saying, okay, I'm going to get rid of Muzzin and I'll get rid of Martinez, but I can see the Flyers really going after Martinez. That's probably the guy I personally believe that the Flyers will go after. I could see Anton Strawman. This might be it. For the Tampa Bay Lightning. Can they keep all these players? I mean, they're up against the cap too, and a lot of their young players are going to have to start to pay for. So I did include Anton Strawman on that list because I would love to have him, and he doesn't have a modified trade clause, so that is the hiccup there.
Yeah, I don't see with both Toronto and Tampa Bay. This is right. Just one man's opinion.
They're contenders, and I get it.
Contenders.
But the way I see it, the reason I included it. And,
well, obviously, what would have to happen there is any kind of trade for a UFA. Right. The Flyers would have to get in touch with their agent and make some kind of deal, agreement in principle, or else it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but
I don't see it happen. I agree with you about Parayko, and Martinez represents to me. And I'm going to move to Tom, a stabilizer on defense. And that, you look at Andrew McDonald, who played a little bit better than most people thought last year. This year has been a dumpster fire like the Flyers themselves. But getting a stabilizer on defense in that top four really has to be some kind of priority, regardless of what any kind of retool or rebuild looks like.
Absolutely. You got to solidify that defensive unit because it's in shambles right now. But you also have to consider, all right, we've got Phil Myers knocking on the door. We got Sam Moran, who's basically going to get a shot because he's not waiver exempt anymore. And he really hasn't been given a chance at the NHL yet. So you've got to think the Flyers are going to at least give him a look. And Mark Friedman is also making some noise. So you also have to weigh that when you go looking for a top four defenseman. How much do you value that when you know you've got other kids coming up? Now maybe Fletcher is thinking he's going to trade one of them in a deal, and that kind of solidifies things. Or maybe he takes a look at Radko Gudas and says, you know what, Myers or Friedman can fill his void on the third pairing until they're ready to assume a bigger role. I'm going to get rid of Gudas and insert Myers or Friedman. There's a lot of moving parts, but I definitely agree that a top four, if I had a choice between going and getting a winger or a defenseman, I'm going to go get a top four defenseman every day of the week.
Yeah. And I think with all the kids, you can only go so young on defense. If everybody's 25 and under, and nobody's really hit that peak where you can count on them consistently. We've seen Provorov fall back this year, recent play notwithstanding. I think that stabilizer on D is a must. And one of these kids is going to be included in a trade. We want to get Amac out of here. So we get someone to replace Amac. I would send Amac on the same taxi service that they took Gerard Gallant out on. And we order a Greyhound bus for anybody else. You have a lot of the same guy in Robert Haig, Gudas, Moran. Sorry, Dan. And Dan is crazy, loves Sam Moran. But but you have to solidify this defense. We haven't had that rock, that guy that is really the glue on D since Chemo left. So I think that is really an imperative. So that'll be another move. I had put it out there, and I think, Dan, we talked about it last show. If I had my druthers about a trade scenario, and this is completely spitballing, there's no sources or anything, I would take Jake Voracek and Shane Gostisbehere and try to get St. Louis to give us Tarasenko and Parayko. And before anybody says, there's no way St. Louis will do that. The thing that, to me, looking at St. Louis play, they're skating in quicksand. They're so slow. There's so little dynamism or speed. We've been giving up those elements for what I think are better fits. And again, there's that word again, fit, for what the Flyers need to do. Because if you get a guy like Parayko with Provorov, then you got your top pairing maybe for a decade. And the Flyers have needed a shoot first finisher as a forward as opposed to a dangler or a guy who's more of a setup guy in Voracek for a long time. But I can't say anything like that is going to happen. That's something we all wish for. But what's your thinking, Dan?
Well, they just need to find at this point. Pretty much anybody would upgrade over what they have. And, I think you need somebody to really complement Ivan Provorov, and you need somebody to complement Gostisbehere. That would be the first part. And, then you let guys like Myers and Moran and Friedman all kind of work around them, put them on the third pair and see what they got. And then if they can prove then they can move up, then let them move up later.
Yeah, I actually prioritize Sanheim at this point even more than Gostisbehere. I think the ceiling with him as an overall defenseman is greater. And Jamey, maybe you could speak to that because you spent a fair amount of time watching him both here and in Lehigh Valley.
Yeah, Travis Sanheim is absolutely phenomenal. This kid is lightning fast, and I was able to see him last year in full with being fully credentialed for the Flyers, but previously for the Phantoms the prior year. And I scouted him when he was a member of the Calgary Hitmen. He has just come on, and he's worked in his gap control, his keeping his players, limiting their space is what I mean by gap control. And he's just very smart with the puck. He knows where to be. He seems to be always in position. He does have a careless turnover every now and then, but I could live with that because all the other facets of his game are just quite unique, and he's really taken a top four role in my eyes. And and he should be on the power play unit. I mean, it's about time that he's starting to see some time, in the PP. He's fast. His vision of the ice is there. He just knows where to be at all times. He seems to communicate very well with his other defensive partner, but with the forwards as well. And I think the forwards trust Sanheim to always be there, for them. And you see that his minutes are starting to creep up towards 20 a game. They're about 18 and a half, right now. But I think he's deserving of that because he's worked so hard on his gap control. And that, to me, was the weakest part of his game coming into this season was, trying to limit, space for these great players that he's playing against.
Yeah, I mean, Travis, that and his play away from the puck really have improved. And
absolutely. Him and Radko Gudas have been the two most consistent players. And I want to point this out there for those who don't know, but there is interest with Radko Gudas in the Calgary Flames are knocking on the door for Radko Gudas. And that comes to me as no surprise because he's been, to me, him and Sanheim have been by far the two most consistent defensemen. You could put Robert Hagg in that mix too. I'm not surprised by Sanheim at all. Not at all.
I could see that closeout on defense. If what Jamey says is true, it doesn't surprise me. I think Gudas has a lot of appeal, maybe more appeal than some of the people think. I don't think if they traded him, they would have to eat any of his money. He's a right-handed shot. He's proven he can play well with a guy who's on the right side of the puck. And he had some physicality. And as we all know, in the postseason, that is a little bit more valuable than it is in the regular season.
Gudas is definitely one of the more underrated guys that over the last few years that he's been here. Last year was not the greatest we've seen from Radko Gudas, but he seems to have turned it around this year. And only a $3.35 million cap hit. That's not terrible. I believe he has 2 more years on that, if memory serves me correctly, although I have this lovely contraption called a laptop in front of me. And I can just look it up right now. He's got this year and the year after. So he's got 1 more full year as under that deal. So Gudas is definitely a guy that I could see who would generate some interest from teams. And I think he's a really solid third pairing guy. Can be moved up to the second pair with the right player, a Travis Sanheim type of player who complements Gudas really well. The one really effective thing about Gudas is that it seems like he's kind of found that right balance between playing aggressively and playing recklessly. And maybe that play last year where he almost decapitated one of the Jets was enough for him to go, I got to tone this down a little bit. And he's got that. He still has that grinded out, lower the gear to him. But he's also rediscovered himself from 2 years ago when he was one of the more effective guys on this blue line.
Yeah. We were kind of down on him going into the season because we thought that he was kind of declawed by the league, and that was definitely a concern. But like you said, he's kind of rallied and built up his value. And if Philip Myers is in the wings, this is an opportunity for the Flyers to move on as part of their effort to improve this defense. But Dan, I want to talk a little bit about the forwards. We talked ad nauseum about Wayne Simmonds. It seems imminent that within the next 4 weeks, certainly before February 25th, which is the official NHL trade deadline, he'll be moved. There's a lot of rumors about what he could bring back. I was reading Charlie O'Connor thinks he could get a prospect and a second-round pick, or maybe a player who's ready right now, maybe a lower pick. But beyond that, if you look at what the Flyers need to do, one thing that Anthony Sanfilippo talked about was, and we all agree, we've talked about this, even I thought that since the Carter-Richards trades, I never liked the mix of these players. It was like we won the trades, but we lost the war. LA got 2 cups, and we got a bunch of players that really never took us anywhere. And maybe you could blame that on the GM with other factors. But here we are in 2019, and Wayne Simmonds, Voracek, and now it seems like JVR don't really fit. How do we get Jake out of here? Can we do that this year? Can that happen with JVR if that's what we want to do? What's your thinking on that?
I think the case of the Flyers forwards is just extremely baffling. Is there another team in the league that has so many talented players that just can't get it together? And you kind of brought it up about, winning the battle, losing the war, but you got the list of players here, the Van Riemsdykes and the Voraceks, and I would get rid of Voracek more than likely in the summer. I think you can probably work out a better deal for him then. Simmonds is probably gone by the deadline, though at this point, I had no idea what his value is. He only has 11 goals and 6 assists this season. He's definitely not going to be as valuable as he could be, say, if they traded him last summer. But, I think it's going to be tough. I think you really got to kind of rebuild everything. These guys don't seem to have a ton of chemistry, and, players that do have chemistry, like Patrick and Lindblom, they really showed a lot last season, but they didn't really click offensively. They weren't scoring a lot of goals, even though they were playing really well. I think the best thing that they can do is really analyze, the guys that have worked well together, that have meshed well together, Konechny and Giroux and the top line of Couturier, put them together, find somebody to work with, Patrick and Lindblom, that can really expose them, whether it's somebody like Tyler Seguin or somebody else, it's fine. Go out there and, you just got to add some more stars to this team. And even if that means shipping out the ones that are currently on the roster.
Yeah, I really believe that the Flyers are at cross purposes here. They need better star players that add different elements that they don't have currently, but they also need more depth. We're hoping that the depth could be provided from the younger players. Maybe a veteran gets brought in, and the draft or trades or free agency can provide some of these other forwards. But before that, there's other players that could be moved, like Michael Raffl, who is playing some really good hockey right now, and Dale Weiss, who's kind of elevated his value a little bit. He might have to eat some salary, but there's no reason at this point that players like Nick Obey-Kubel, Jamey can't get a look right now. If we're talking about Phil Myers on defense, maybe after a Gudas trade, if your sources are hearing the right thing, Nick Obey-Kubel up front, space should be cleared out. When you look at guys like Raffl and Weiss, what's the point anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm surprised they didn't call up NAK today, to tell you the truth, just to provide some sort of a spark. I just can't. And to me, that means that something is working behind the doors right now, with Chuck Fletcher. And I don't think he's put down his phone the past few weeks anyway. But yeah, like you said, if you get rid of some of these players, you could call up, some of the young players. But then it gets into the thing, the later the season goes on, these younger players are gelling with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. Do you want to ruin what winning a Calder, winning a championship is everything. And for a young player, who doesn't, have a shot at the Stanley Cup right now, so winning that Calder, that could show a lot. So you have to pay attention towards that too, and be very fine on who you want to call up, the later as this season goes on. But there are a few names that Ghost could be an attractive piece. Like you said, Michael Raffles is attractive. I think they can move Voracek if they eat salary on that as well. And like you mentioned, for Dale Weiss, eating salary. So we do have some pieces, Rocco Gudis, for instance. And, I wouldn't be surprised with Sam Morin, what are they going to do? So Robert Hagg, becomes, I personally don't think, the Flyers would, move Hagg, but who knows? I mean, when you look at defensemen, like Tom was saying, Philip Myers is knocking on the door here. You call Phil and he starts to play well. Are you going to move Hagg? Morin, he's waiver exempt, so he can't get sent down, with the exception for a conditioning stint, which he will do for about 8 to 10 games with Lehigh. He's going to come up. So, they have a conundrum there. So that's where Christian Folin comes in. And to me, if I were Scott Gordon, I would bench Amac and put Folin in, tomorrow. I really don't know what Amac is doing in there at this particular time, other than that, although he has had a few okay games, within the past week or so. But they do have some pieces. I think they'll buy out Amac in the offseason. That's what I would do anyway.
Right,
but,
right. Let me move on to Tom, because Flyers Twitter had a field day with the word that Brandon Manning, who was sent to the Oilers, and I'm not getting into all the nonsense about his broken collarbone, and McDavid was just skating too fast for his own good and kind of slid on his own into breaking his collarbone. But the Flyers were in talks last year about trading Brandon Manning, and Hextall hung on to him. I know we don't know the whole picture. That seemed to drive Flyers, or should I say Flyer, Twitter, crazy.
I'm sorry. I was one of Hextall's biggest supporters when he was here, but that's malpractice. I'm sorry. If Peter Chiarelli calls up, period. If Peter Chiarelli calls up, you swindle him for every single thing that you can get out of him, because that I don't understand. And I'm going to prevent myself from going off on a tangent here. Peter Chiarelli is an awful executive. And the second Edmonton hired him I think that was right before they won the lottery, when McDavid, before they won the McDavid sweepstakes. And that's one of the reasons that McDavid going to Edmonton just really got under my skin, because I knew that Chiarelli would screw it up. Like, they're going to mess one of the greatest players to ever play this game. They're going to mess him up. And sure enough, McDavid's like the only person, probably minus Leon Draisaitl and a few other guys there. He's the only guy that's worth. Yeah. Like, I know I'm leaving a few guys off of there, but it's essentially the Connor McDavid show out in Edmonton.
Right.
And Chiarelli is somehow screwing this up. You have Connor McDavid. It's almost impossible. He got the answers to 90% of the questions on the test and conveniently lost the paper with all the answers on it. It's unbelievable how, and I'm going to get back to Hextall here. I don't care what Chiarelli was offering. Trade Manning. He's great. He's good in the locker room. Awesome. He's not a good hockey player. Trade him.
It rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe they wanted the Flyers to take some salary. I think that at that particular juncture, maybe Chiarelli felt a little bit more comfortable in his own shoes and his position in Edmonton. Obviously, based on his activity, he is just kind of scrambling in a kind of like a discursive level of activity where he's flailing away.
He's rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. And I think he's going to get fired. I don't think he can do anything short of even if he makes the playoffs. He's had a horrible tenure. How do you take what would normally be a tanking dream to get McDavid, the most dynamic player in the league, bar none, and just turn it into this? Even Ron Hextall, with all of his patience, Dan, couldn't have screwed that one up.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the downfall of Hextall in the beginning, and I talked about this in the beginning of the show. He had a plan. He had an end game, and he had a current team, but he had no intention of building a road to get from point A to point B. And, he didn't want to tank. He wanted to stay competitive. And, while that has brought a couple decent picks, you look at all the, players that have gone in the top 2 or 3 over the last, 4 or 5 years. And, they really missed quite a few opportunities.
Yeah, I really thought that when they got lucky with Nolan Patrick, that the so-called hockey guys were looking out for the Flyers. And I'm not going to get into how wretched Nolan Patrick has played this year and how I think he belongs in the AHL for the rest of the year. I'm sure I'll get a lot of at OMB Puck. That's our official Twitter account. But that's what I really believe. I have some inside info on that Nolan Patrick might have a little bit of that entitlement gene in him, based on maybe a little bit of deferential treatment by the previous administration. And that needs to change. That's one of the little sacred cows that needs to change under Chuck Fletcher. But, yeah, getting back to Chiarelli, it's just I don't know how you screw that up. And it's a tough situation out there. I'll tell you one thing. One player that might be moved out of desperation, I'd be making phone calls, Jamey, about Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. If the Flyers really want to keep Claude Giroux from being at center, what a mess they are at Edmonton. They recently have been playing RNH with McDavid and Draisaitl, and you got 3 centers. No wingers. This is like all helicopter lines. And I like that player. He's like a faster Couturier, not quite as bright hockey-wise. Not like he's stupid or anything, but I like the profile of the player, and I'm just wondering what would it take to get him as not only for now, but also going forward.
Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is a pretty solid player, and he'd help the Flyers out. And you know how I feel about Claude Giroux playing center. So that's funny that you let me have this question here.
I always have a strategy. I'm looking out for you.
I see that. But I'm not. I will tell the viewers I'm not a fan of Claude Giroux playing center at this time. But just because he's playing PK. So if he wasn't playing the penalty kill, I'd be more open to him playing the center position. But with him doing it all now, center, PK, and PP, he's like a younger, 24, 25-year-old, like he is, and he's 30 now. So,
Yeah, it definitely takes it out of you. However, like we talked about earlier, since he's come back and they've made some changes, their PK has been like 86%. Yeah. So obviously that's another issue that Chuck Fletcher needs to address.
No, you're right. Chuck is going to be a very busy man. Make no mistake. I will tell you this. There's going to be multiple trades here. Who's going to get moved? I don't know because I don't have, like 100% confirmation on who and which. The only one was Radko Gudas. But, who else? I don't know. I can't tell you. But I can tell you that moves are going to happen. Wayne Simmons would be the most obvious. Yeah. But there will be Flyer fans stick with it because some changes are coming for sure.
Okay. And there's no doubt about it. I got to move on, but I just want to give a World Junior Championships update. I think they're starting the third period real soon. and Canada is up 1-0 on Finland. And Eli Tolvanen has 5 shots by himself, and Ian Mitchell scored the goal for Canada. And of course, later tonight, the USA is going to be playing. So I wanted to give an update on what the Flyers prospects are doing right now in Vancouver at this WJC tournament before we go. As of right now, and obviously they're going to play and these numbers will change, Morgan Frost has 4 goals and 7 points in 4 games and has stood out. There's no question about that. Noah Cates has no points in 4 games played for the USA, but I notice him all the time. He's always in the right spot. He looks like a bottom 6 guy that might be able to make the league. Jay O'Brien has had a tough year with injuries, and he's had a rough tournament. I think he should be playing more because he provides a lot of hustle, but he's got no points in 4 games, and his ice time has been diminishing. For Sweden, Adam Ginning has played 3 games. I think he played today, and Sweden lost, was eliminated by the Swiss, like we talked about earlier. So his tournament is over. Jack St. Ivany has played 4 games and has no points. It has not had the coach's confidence. Now, that leaves 2 players that, along with Frost, are standing out. Now, today, in his 4th game, Samuel Ersson, who was, a 5th-round pick last year from Sweden. Before today's game, he had a .914 save percentage, 2.28 goals against average. And apparently he played a very good game today. And Jamie, you were talking about his performance was top notch.
Oh, yeah. Sweden would have lost 10-0 today if it wasn't for Samuel Ersson. He kept them in it. He did everything in his power. And the Swiss were just better. Like you said, Isaiah, in the beginning, on the opening, the Swiss goaltender, outplayed Ersson. But Ersson he opened my eyes.
Yeah,
He pushed Sweden on their shoulders. He was the 3rd player. He was the top 3 Swedish player for this competition. He was given that after their loss 2-0 today to Swiss. But,
but I mean, the thing is, you have to have a coming out party, and it appears like the Samuel Ersson's coming out party. It's right here at the WGC. It'll be worth watching how he is seated among the goaltending prospects. We can't all assume that Carter Hart's a sure thing, but Tom, I wanted to close with Joel Farabee, who going into tonight's game has played 4 games, 5 points, 3 goals, and has been the most impressive player of all the Flyer prospects. In fact, they were saying on the broadcast the other night that they were so impressed at BU with Joel Farabee that they're considering at some point moving him to center. That's a big deal when you come into a program like BU as a winger and they like you so much and they trust you that they're even thinking in that direction.
I mean, it's great to see Farabee. I was a Farabee guy going into the draft. I had him pegged as the Flyers' 14th pick, or for the 14th pick, and the first guy off the board for the Flyers. And sure enough, he was still there. And I'm really glad that Hextall picked him up because I really liked what I read, what I watched from him, and everything really about him. And actually, in the update that he gave on the World Juniors, Noah Cates had an absolutely stunning goal against the Czechs tonight. That's going into the first intermission right now as we're talking. But yeah, a great play by Jack Hughes. Hopefully, knock on wood, potential future Flyer. But it's been great to see Farabee playing so well and kind of as a freshman at BU to kind of come in and assert himself almost as maybe kind of a similar route to Wade Allison. It's great to see guys come in so young and make their mark. And hopefully Farabee is going to continue that trend because he seems like the kind of guy that this team is missing right now. Farabee ain't afraid to shoot the puck from from this limited highlights I've seen from the World Juniors. So hopefully he's on this team sooner than later.
Yeah, I would say I am so impressed with what I've seen from Farabee in terms of not just production, but the way he plays the game, his vision, the plays he makes, the subtleties. That I would call him a model player for what I want the Flyers to look for going forward. Not the only kind of player, but if I had to pick a top six forward and what kind of qualities they have, I think Joel Farabee has most of them. And knowing he's going to get stronger, his skating's only going to improve, his shot will get better, so on and so forth. So I'll be very interested to see his progress. And obviously somebody like Jay O'Brien is just going to need a redo for next year, or at least close out well. And gents, we're going to have to leave it there. We're going to find out more about the WJC. Obviously they wrap up on the 5th. And there's going to be a champion, and I think it's probably going to be either Canada or the U.S. We'll find out. But until the 15th, when we'll see you again, the Flyers play 7 more games, and there could be a trade in there. And I think I mentioned on Twitter that this fan base needs a trade like an addict needs a fix. So unfortunately, I hate to put it in such stark terms, but we need some strange, the way Howard Stern used to say it. Just before we go, Tom, you're at sonsofpen.com, and your on Twitter handle is?
My name. I got super creative with it. It's at Tom Foti, TOMFOTI.
Fantastic. Really appreciate you coming on, and certainly we'll love to have you on again. And Jamey, you are at phillysportsnetwork.com, our podcast partner. And where can people find you on Twitter?
At Jamey Baskow. And it was an honor coming on, and I appreciate it. And every time I come on here, it gets better and better. Tom, I wish you nothing but the best. Dan,
thank you, Jamey. You
rightfully so. You've always been a friend of mine, and I appreciate that. And Isaiah, thank you very much. You're the man. And of course, Chef. It's an honor coming on for you guys. And
Dan, final word from you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Dan the Flyer Fan. You can find my site at Brotherly Puck. Also, if you're interested, I have some Carter Hart facts. You can find that at Hart Countdown on Twitter. That will be up and running now. You can find the daily updates about his stats and numbers. And that is it from me.
Fantastic. And remember, the O&B Puckcast is on 5 podcast formats, including SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and so forth. Also on the phillysportsnetwork.com YouTube channel in about 36 hours or so. If you could rate and subscribe, it really helps us move up the charts, particularly with iTunes, but of course any platform. And with that, we really appreciate you joining us tonight. So until then, let's go Flyers, and everybody, take care.